What is up, guys? It is the Bluebloods here coming at y'all with another Power 5 preview, man. Listen, the season is like so close. I don't know about you guys. I can like taste it. Like I need this to happen ASAP. Like I can't wait for kickoff next week. Listen, we starting our previews next week. We are going to do like listen, we're so excited for football. We are previewing like every game being played Saturday, dude. I don't care if you told me the practice squad for like Home Depot is playing. We got a preview coming for you. We just want to see some type of football on the field. So guys, if you haven't tuned into our previews before, wherever you're watching, man, we definitely appreciate it. We're over on YouTube, live on Twitter, Facebook, man. So make sure to like, retweet, share, subscribe, all that stuff, no matter where you're watching, man. We definitely appreciate y'all tuning in. So how this is going to go, we're going to talk storylines first, get into the top games to watch for the upcoming season, get into players to watch, talk about some sleeper teams that we're both excited about, and then we got our official predictions dropping at the end of the show, so stay tuned for that. And as always, wherever you're watching, there should be a chat box. Put your questions, put your concerns, put your comments, everything like that in the chat box. We want this to be popping, interacting, everything like that, so we appreciate y'all tuning in on this Saturday night, man. Hope y'all are having a great weekend. But let's get right into it, Brandon. The only storyline that realistically we have to talk about here is what is next for the Big 12 after Texas and Oklahoma leave. We've covered this on a few shows already. We kind of gave our thoughts on individual teams, things like that. Figured it'd be a nice time to kind of recap it here. Now that we know, we can kind of separate the rumors from the truth at this point. There was a time where there were so many wild reports coming out of the Big 12 that it was like the AAC is going to eat everybody up. The Pac-12's taking TCU. The Big 10's taking Kansas and Iowa State. Baylor might go to the SEC. I mean, there were so many things happening. But for you, what are your thoughts on what's next for the Big 12 after Texas and Oklahoma leave, now that we know about the Big 10, ACC, and Pac-12 alliance where they're not going to fight over these teams?
Yeah, dude. So realistically, what I see happening, and from what I'm hearing as well, and I can't remember exactly which reports I saw, but the SEC is not really looking to add any more teams. Like they're pretty much like they're done as well. So realistically, what I see happening to the remainder of the Big 12, which is going to be 8 teams now, I see them, and I know you'll probably disagree with me here because you've been very vocal about the AAC. I think they snatch up some group of 5 teams. I really do. And I think that they fill these 2 spots at least. They might try to fill 4 spots and try to get back to 12 teams. That way they're at least competitive with the other conferences. I mean, the SEC and ACC have 16 teams, or will have 16 teams. The Big 10 has 14 teams, and the Pac-12 I think has 12 teams. So I mean, they have to be able to compete. So I say that they go as hard as they can after teams like SMU, probably Houston, maybe some others. I think those are like the 2 for sure that they're going to try to go after.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, I mean, as you know, I'm very vocal that the AAC should come in and try to merge somewhat together. That way we could start having divisions in that conference. That way you can make a better argument, Brandon, that that's a Power 5 conference, because I would love to see a team like a Cincinnati, a Memphis, a UCF have a realistic shot at a college football playoff spot. But I guess let me take your plan first. So if they're going to add teams, I think the list should somewhat look like this, because I feel like you've already, right now the conference stretches from like right there, the Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas, all the way to West Virginia, which was a weird add in the first place. I think you should look at, I agree, SMU and Houston would be 2 interesting choices. I also think maybe you should even look to expand a little bit more west, and maybe even look at a Boise State, Brandon. If you're looking to add somebody that has a history of winning, has a history of being somewhat competitive, Boise State's AD, and when Brian Harsin was there, who's now at Auburn, they were already exploring options into moving into the Power 5. So I think Boise State would be, 1, willing, and 2, come with enough name recognition where, yes, it's a big drop off from Texas or Oklahoma, but I feel like their brand might be bigger than an SMU's or a Houston's. And then I think an interesting choice, Brandon, you already got to go all the way to West Virginia. Why not even look into adding a Memphis or an Appalachian State? There's no reason, in my opinion, that those teams should be off the table. And I think both of those teams would be willing. Both of those teams have the fan bases that would, I think, make an interesting Big 12. The problem here is that no matter who you add, I feel like the Big 12 is at a disadvantage because everyone's going to say, well, it's not Texas or Oklahoma. So I feel like, one, fans need to adjust their expectations because if the Big 12 looks to stay together, they're not going to add anybody with a name recognition of a Texas and or an Oklahoma. But what you need to do is try to salvage it at least. Try to find teams that are going to be able to compete somewhat because you don't want to have what happens with a Kansas where, Brandon, we're making our predictions, and I feel like the first spot, the last spot to decide is easier than to decide who wins the conference. It's like, yeah, Kansas is going to be in dead last. Like, it's not even a discussion anymore. So, exactly. And, they got a great coach out of Buffalo coming in, Lance Leipold and all that. But right now they're way behind the Big 12. So those are like the realistic options for me. But Brandon, let's move in to our Big 12 preview this year. This move isn't happening for a while. I'm sure there's more information going to come out after the season this year when decisions start being made. Let's get to our top games to watch here, man. So I got mine separated, but let's start with non-conference games, Brandon. I feel like we need to separate these because we'll jump back and forth. So let's say, what non-conference games are you looking forward to most and might have the biggest impact on the Big 12?
I honestly think, Zach, you're going to have to go ahead with this one because I had no non-conference teams on my games to watch. I didn't see – I honestly did not see a ton of – well, you know what? I take it back. I had one. I'm sorry. I had one. I had Iowa and Iowa State. I think that's going to be probably the biggest out-of-conference game for the Big 12 in its entirety because as I was going through this list of games to watch in the Big 12 this season, like they didn't really schedule up. They weren't like going out of their way to schedule teams like, for instance, Clemson is playing Georgia. So the ACC and SEC are crossing over there. What's the other? Oregon's playing Ohio State. So the Pac-12 and Big 10 there. But the Big 12 just kind of sat back. And Iowa and Iowa State are only playing because they have that rivalry that they can't split up, really, because once Iowa left the Big 12, they were like, okay, well, we're going to keep this. But this game, I mean, both teams, and I mentioned this because I already mentioned this game on our last live stream for the Big 10. This is the first time that these two teams have played when they've both been ranked, which is insane to me. Like, think about the history of this game and think about, Iowa State is just one of those games where growing up, even though neither one of these teams were great while we were growing up, like, it's a game that you remembered. Neither one of these teams have been, they've never been ranked at the same time. So that's to me, that's going to be a super exciting game. It comes super early in the season on September 11th. So it's the second weekend, third weekend, but really the second weekend for college football for most teams. It has a lot of implications for the remainder of the season, kind of on the direction of, what might be one of the better teams in the Big 10 versus what's supposed to be the second best team in the Big 12 this season.
I don't know if that rivalry has a name, but it has to be the Battle of the Cornfields, man. It has to be, or the Battle of the Cornstalk, something like that. You got to insert a little Midwest in that name, man, in my opinion. So any Iowa State fans, man, let us know if that rivalry already has a name. If not, trademarking that immediately. The Battle of the Cornfields between Iowa State. That was one of mine. And Brandon, I picked a few more just because the Big 12 has to do better winning out of conference games as well. And so these are important for that. One happens September 4th, week 1 in Arlington, which is Kansas State Stanford. Okay. It's going to be an interesting game. One, Chris Kleiman is doing an outstanding job at Kansas State. Last year was, viewed a bit of a wash for Kansas State because of Skylar Thompson's injury. They beat Oklahoma, and then everyone gets hurt. They had 3 or 4 defensive backs go down, Brandon, after that, and they lose to Arkansas State. And it just all kind of fell apart for Chris Klieman. So, one, this is the first big test of the year for Klieman and this new Kansas State Wildcats team. And two, Stanford's not really, we're going to do our Pac-12 preview next week. They're not really viewed as one of the top contenders for the Pac-12. So, for Kansas State to get a win here, it's huge because when you look at Oklahoma's schedule, you mentioned the non-conference isn't very strong. You look at Iowa State's schedule. Outside of Iowa is not very strong. And so what it's going to do is help the strength of schedule perception in the Big 12, which suffers because, there's a perception that the Big 12 is not very good, which is wrong in my opinion. So this is a huge week 1 game for Kansas State's season because like we all know in the Big 12, you got to play everybody. So they still have the TCUs. They still have the Oklahomas, the Iowa States. They really can't afford to take a loss week 1 to Stanford unless might get ugly down the stretch. And we saw Texas put up like 60 in one of the final weeks of the season on them. It could get real ugly for Kansas State if they lose this week 1 game.
Yeah, I think you're right, Zach. Go ahead.
Oh, and I mean, hey, we just mentioned this team, Brent. I want to throw this in here. Oklahoma State, Boise State.
Okay.
September 18th is a big one. If Boise State goes in there and blows the door off of Mike Gundy, I personally think Mike Gundy could be on one of the hottest seats in the country. We saw what happened last year with Chuba Hubbard and the T-shirt scandal and everything like that. That team greatly underperformed after I think they ranked 6th in the country, Brandon, in mid-October, get upset by Texas, and then the season kind of fell apart for them. So I think Mike Gundy is on a very precarious position because, Brandon, we don't see coaches have the longevity that he has at a school and not win big games. And Boise State week 3 could be huge because once they start getting to that conference schedule, I really feel like Oklahoma State's going to have a tough road ahead. Losing that game is big. And personally, Brandon, this game is my last one here before we get to conference. And this might not be a big game for the Big 12. It's a big game for a Big 12 team. Kansas versus Coastal Carolina.
Yeah.
September 11th. That upset last year really kind of sparked the Coastal Carolina breakout last year where they just shocked everyone, rose to, almost top 10 in the country. If Kansas gets their doors blown off again, man, how much of a black eye is that for the Big 12? But
it's also the Big 12's worst team.
It is. It is, but they shouldn't be getting blown out like that. I mean, Grayson McCall made that defense look like melted butter, man. I mean, he was throwing as he wanted, running as he wanted. Kansas had no answer. And this year, Coastal Carolina has one of the best teams in the Sun Belt. But man, how much of a demoralizing fact is that for Kansas to be like, man, we got this new coach, all these new players, all these new transfers. We're going to return to what we were in the mid 2000s, and then get your doors blown off week 2 against Coastal Carolina. That's not a good look when you still have the Texases, the Oklahomas, the Iowa States on that schedule. I think what it's going to do, Brandon, they might not win that game, but if it's not competitive, which it wasn't last year, that's more demoralizing than just losing the game. So Coastal Carolina, Kansas is just important for Kansas as a motivation, momentum type thing. They just have to keep it competitive, Brandon, because right now Coastal Carolina looks like they might beat them by 20, which is absolutely ridiculous. If I would have told you in 2008 when Kansas was number 2 that Coastal Carolina was going to be a better overall football team.
An absolutely wild season, by the way. 2008.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm about to say Missouri and Kansas dominating college football in 08 or 07, whatever it was. But, man, let's just go together on this one. We know what's the biggest game of the year. I know it's on both our lists. Oklahoma, Iowa State, man, November 20th. Brandon, what makes this game so unique is how late in the season it comes.
Yeah.
Because I know early season matchups can be variable and hard to predict because some teams just don't have the momentum, the chemistry built up in week 3 or 4. But, man, Brandon, this is week 11. Going, toward the end of the season, both of these teams, in my opinion, are going to be operating at just full strength, hopefully with no injuries. But the chemistry is going to be there. The momentum is going to be there. There's a chance, Brandon, that this matchup is an 11-0 matchup. Because looking at the schedules, I don't see many losses for Iowa State or Oklahoma on the schedule before this game. So, I mean, you're talking about this game could be the biggest Big 12 game that we've seen in a long time in the regular season.
Dude, absolutely. And this is, I mean, when is the last time that Iowa State was in the top 10 for this kind of matchup? Like, we never see this. This is like
we saw it last year. We saw it last year.
Besides last season. Last season was kind of an anomaly for Iowa State, and that's why they're ranked number 7 preseason this year. But, I mean, this defense, dude, is the truth at Iowa State, and that's why they're up here. So what we're going to see is kind of – and we make fun of the Big 12 because they're all offense, no defense. Iowa State's kind of like – they're like the anomaly there. They're like the go ahead.
Well, the Big 12 is overall had I believe the Big 12 was one of the strongest defensive conferences last year in terms of rankings.
Last season, Zach, but historically talking about the Big 12.
Oh, yeah, no, historically it's shocking, but, man, listen, the hirings of, like, Dave Aranda and everything like that have really helped this conference improve the perception. And, Brandon, the shocking thing is I can't live up to say this, Iowa State probably doesn't have the best defense in that game.
You don't think so, really?
I'm going to put it on wax, and I've released an episode. I'll link it in the bio. Oklahoma will have a top 10 defense this year. I'll put whatever amount of money.
They're just going to be unbeatable in your mind. Like they will not lose the game.
They were top 20 last year.
They have a top 10 offense. They have a top 3 offense, I think.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, that's not even a debate. But
defense is top 10. That's crazy.
They were top 20 last year. So, and they're returning on everyone except for I'm blanking on the kid's name, the cornerback that got Trey Norwood. He's the only starter they lost on that defense, really. But then Buki transferred to Washington. So they lost 2 impact players, and that whole front 7 is returning, Brandon. 4 of their starting defensive linemen, which are all of them, if you run a 4-3, graded out the top 5 pass rushers at their position.
Yeah, I can't fault you, man. I mean, you're right. And when you're right, you're right. This Oklahoma team is going to be freaking scary, though. Like, I guess I just didn't even think about this because, like, so I'm a gambler. If you're a gambler, go place a future on Oklahoma, not only to win the Big 12, by the way, and that's coming up, but to be in the playoff, I think. If Zach's right about the top 10 in both offense and defense, which it sounds kind of like he might be, definitely I would. Like, I'm kind of on my way right now. I'm on my way to Gulfport right now to go to the casino so I can play some bets.
I mean, not even like just this matchup, the Oklahoma-Iowa State matchup, guys. This is the matchups that we could be getting. We could be getting Brock Purdy versus Spencer Rattler, probably the top 2 quarterbacks in the conference right now. Spencer Rattler is an odds-on Heisman favorite, arguably the top. I would say arguably a top 2 quarterback. Because I mean, you can make an argument for Sam Howell, but he's top 2. Let's just put it like that. Then you have the running back matchup, Brandon. You got Breece Hall at Iowa State, who led the nation in rushing. Yeah. Then on the flip side, on Oklahoma, you have Eric Gray from Tennessee, who had an explosive first 2 years there. And on top of Kennedy Brooks coming back, who was the leading rusher 2 years ago, who opted out last year. So you have that. Then at wide receiver, Xavier Hutchinson for Iowa State, on top of Marvin Milnes and let's just say the plethora of wide receivers they got over there at Oklahoma, including Jadon Hazelwood, who I'm excited for. Then the tight end battle, Brandon. You have the 2 highest graded tight ends in the country in Charlie Kohler and Austin Stogner.
Yeah.
Dude, just on offense, the matchups are going to be legendary. This game, Brandon, I would say is going to be a top 3 game this year. I would put it right up there with Georgia Clemson.
I'm very excited for it. I really am. I mean, and it's beyond that. I mean, even like the defensive battle here, you mentioned that Oklahoma is going to be this top 10 defense. I think Iowa State's right up there with them. With Mike Rose leading this defense, dude, he is a scary guy, by the way. I can't wait till we get to players. But, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. This is going to be one of the greatest games we see all season. And to come so late for it to have, like – because this might – I mean, there's a really good chance that they played this end of the season game and they just turn right back around and play the Big 12 conference championship again. Like that would be absolutely wild.
I am praying that COVID doesn't wipe out fans because I already have an Oklahoma connection who reached out to me, and I plan on being in Norman for this game. It's only like a 3-hour drive from where I am. I will find a way, Norman. Listen, y'all can get me tickets from hanging from the rafters. I'll find my way into that stadium. I'm so pumped. But Brandon, another game I'm excited for, and this one I know I'm going to have to explain a little bit, is TCU Texas, October 2nd.
Yeah.
For me, I'm pumped for this game because, one, we're going to find out this game, Brandon, how good Steve Sarkisian really is at play calling. Because he doesn't have Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, Mac Jones, Najee Harris, the best offensive line in the country at Alabama. You're going to find out how if he can out-scheme one of the best defensive schemers in Gary Patterson that week. And that TCU defense is loaded. We'll get into that in just a little bit. But that offense, man, who's going to start? I already went over this week. We dropped our fall camp updates. The Texas quarterback battle is far from over. Hudson Card, Casey Thompson, neither are separating themselves. So we don't even know who the starting quarterback is going to be. But what a test October 2nd. And Brandon, I know you know this stat because I brought it up when I picked TCU to pull the upset this year. They have owned Texas in the recent years. They've won like 9 out of the last like 11 matchups. And they've dominated them in Austin. TCU, Gary Patterson is a matchup nightmare for Texas. And this is going to be interesting, Brandon. How far can Bijan Robinson carry this team? Because I don't think the Texas has the wide receivers to match up with TCU. So it's going to be a Bijan Robinson, Zachary Evans running back battle.
Ooh,
two of the best running backs coming out of that class going head to head. Who's going to get there? But the thing for Steve Sarkisian is he really a quarterback guru, or was Alabama just uber talented? Because we're going to find out. Because I promise you, Casey Thompson and Hudson Card are going to be a large step down from what he was working with at Bama. So TCU Texas, October 2nd is a game I'm looking for. Because for me, Brandon, that game's one going to really determine if Texas is going to even compete for anything in the Big 12, and two, I think TCU could be very scary this year, and I'll get into that a little bit later when we get to our sleepers and stuff, just a spoiler. But I think TCU, it could be right there in the thick of things. This is going to be a contender-pretender matchup October 2nd. Who's the contender, who's the pretender between Texas and TCU?
It for sure will be, Zach. And I've got one more I want to mention real quick, and it's, like I said, it's going to be real quick. It's going to be Oklahoma, Texas, the Red River rivalry, whatever the game's called now. We keep changing it. But anyway, this is always just a fun game to watch. It comes pretty early in the season this year, though, Zach. It comes like week 5, I think. It's October 9th. It's not going to be – I don't think it's going to be very close. It is a rivalry game, so I guess anything could –
It's always close. It's weird. It's like even if Texas is – dog water that they like somehow pull out and like they're in the game in like the late third quarter. It's just like LSU A&M. It's just like Auburn Alabama. There's just always like that there's always like that like rivalry what if factor in that game. So I'm not counting anyone out in that game, but I think there's a strong favorite this year, especially Texas doesn't have a quarterback.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, dude, Texas quarterback situation is insane right now, like what's going on. But, yeah, I had to put that game on here. You can't not have that game on here for a Big 12 preview. I don't think that game's going to determine anything. It's just going to be a great game to watch. It's going to be a really fun game to watch. So, yeah, I had to have it on my list.
So I'll end this segment up and we'll move on to players to watch. Brandon, I'm going to have one that's off the wall. Let me explain it to y'all before y'all, just like, what are we talking about? West Virginia, Oklahoma State, November 6th.
Okay.
This is important. This is going to be important to me because, one, West Virginia's secondary ravaged by transfers and opt-outs and NFL draft, NFL draft departures. Oklahoma State's offense ravaged by NFL draft departures, Chuba Hubbard, Tylan Wallace, but that defense is still there, and there's some promising players on West Virginia's offense. This, to me, Brandon, is a hot seat game because I already told you Boise State's going to be there for Oklahoma State early. I don't think they're going to be challenging Oklahoma in a few weeks after this game. November 6th is late enough in the season where this is going to determine whether Neil Brown needs to kind of start getting a little antsy about his job and what he's going to do down the stretch. And two, is Mike Gundy in trouble? Because, Brandon, they're probably going to lose to Oklahoma. Let's just be honest. Probably going to lose to Iowa State. Probably going to lose to TCU, Texas, maybe even Kansas State. Oklahoma State, if they drop this game, could be looking at some real trouble. And so I think for me, this conference game, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, could be a hot seat game and one that could really determine whether the Mike Gundy era is sticking around at Oklahoma State. Because I think the patience is real thin over there in Stillwater.
Yeah, I think you're right, Zach. That's a game that didn't even occur to me, but I have them finishing right next to each other in my standings. So I guess that is going to kind of determine something. That'll be fun.
Yeah, and so let's move to players to watch, man. This is always my favorite segment because I feel like a lot of these other YouTube channels, man, they'll give you the stars. They'll be like, hey, go watch Spencer Rattler. It's like, yeah, everyone was already going to go watch Spencer Rattler. But we give you the real facts here, man. We give you the real players. So, Brandon, I'll kick it off. So I always just toss it to you and put you on the spot.
Okay.
I have a player who you probably haven't heard of unless you listen to our show. So I mentioned him last year a few times, and that's Riley Texas for Baylor. He's a cornerback over there. And for me, Brandon, I feel like he's one of the best corners in the country. He's a bright spot for this Dave Aranda team, 2-win season. But Brandon, Texaco didn't get any help. He was targeted only 28 times, Brandon, the entire season. And it just shows how they were picking on the other DBs around him. And so he allowed 35 yards or fewer in 8 of his 9 games, Brandon, and only allowed 10 catches for 89 yards and no touchdowns his first 8 games this season. This kid is all over the field. He's that boundary shutdown corner. He can travel. You can put him in the slot if needed. But Dave Aranda says, listen, I've played at LSU. I always have that go-to guy who I'm like, you're going to shut this guy down. Riley Texas is that guy for Baylor. And I want to see how Dave Aranda utilizes him this year, how he schemes him up. And I think Baylor's going to have a much improved secondary. Our quarterback's going to have to throw at Texaco because the problem is he just doesn't get thrown at enough to make an impact. And we see that with top corners. But when he does get thrown at, he shuts it down ASAP. He had a pick last year, took it back 56 yards so he can make plays with the ball in his hand. I love what this kid brings. I think he's one of the best corners in the country, and I feel like he's a name that you guys need to know about that no one is really looking at. So I think Riley Texaco, that's my guy. That's my first pick here. And I mentioned him last year as a breakout player too, and everyone slept on him, and he showed it this year. So he's definitely a player to watch for me.
Yeah. So what, man, this is tough because I have a big list. I think I'm going to go first, and I'm kind of doing the opposite of Zach. I'm not really going with like under the radar guys. I'm going with guys that you've heard of. But I'll start out with the ones that aren't going to, that aren't coming off of like award-winning seasons. So I'm going to go with Max Duggan as my first choice, Zach. Quarterback TCU. Dude, he honestly surprised me last year with his passing percentage. He passed for 61% last season. I think he and that was only in 10 games, by the way. 146 out of 240, almost 1,800 yards passing, Zach, and he averaged 7.5 yards per pass. 10 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions. And the real things that I can talk about with him, Zach, aren't on paper because it's just the way that he started playing toward the end of the season last year. He had, I'm not going to say a rough beginning of the season, but he definitely started playing better there toward the second half of the season, those next 5 games. And I think he's just primed for a breakout season this year. I don't think that he had that already. He's going to his junior season. Last year, he looked good. His freshman season, he looked pretty good as well, but he hasn't had that breakout year. And he's not the star that we talk about every single week on this podcast. We're not talking about him as like, he's going to be the BIG-12 player of the year. And he might not be this season, but he's definitely going to, I think, take a big step in his game this upcoming year.
I mean, he definitely did. I was going to talk about him later for another segment, but I mean, bro, the way so for a quarterback, I guess a quarterback that can improve his completion percentage like that in a year with no offseason, along with trying to get rid of the turnovers, is pretty outstanding. And I think Max Duggan, man, I think that was a great pick. And I'm going to stick with the TCU thing. I was going to go out. I'm going out of order here because you stuck with TCU.
Yeah.
I have Zach Evans
Okay.
I honestly think, Brandon, if there is a player that's going to be a breakout player of the year that can make a run for the Big 12 player of the year that we're not talking about, is Zach Evans. There is a point in which Zach Evans was the number one running back in the class. He was a top 10 player in his class as well. I think you're going to see it come out this year, Brandon. So he got on campus late last year, had some academic stuff, had an early injury, Brandon. So he only had 54 total rushes last year in the season, but on those averaged over 8 yards per carry, found the end zone 4 times. And on top of that, what's going to separate them now is now the offensive coordinator has had time to work them into some of the passing schemes they have. Personally, I would love to see him get on some screens, put him out in the slot, get him out in space, because that's where Zachary Evans is special. His vision is top-notch as well. I mean, this year he should be running back 1. They had a deep running back room, but now out of fall camp, he has separated himself as the top running back. Brandon averaged almost 10 yards per catch last year out of the backfield in the limited action. This year, I honestly think Evans, coming out of North Shore High School as the number 1 running back, that guy's going to improve. He feels like he's gotten everything together. He's primed and ready. And also, Brandon, here's the key. TCU is going to have probably a top 3 O-line in the conference. Yeah. He's going to benefit from that. And on top of that, their wide receiving core for the Horned Frogs and Max Duggan's running ability is going to give him some opportunities to make some plays with his legs. So right now, I think Zachary Evans is probably my number 1 candidate for breakout player of the year in this conference.
All right. I really like that pick, Zach. I'm going to go with I guess a player who you can say had his breakout season last year, but this is the season that I think that he can truly compete to be one of the best at his position in this conference, and that's going to be Bijan Robinson. I know Breece Hall is up there at Iowa State, and everybody's thinking, oh, you're crazy because he was the leading rusher in the NCAA last season. He also played more games than anybody else did in the country, excluding postseason. So he's very good. I'm not talking down on him at all. But Bijan Robinson, I think, is primed to have an incredible season, Zach, because last year on only 86 touches, he had 703 rushing yards, and he averaged 8.2. You know, you had that big number with Zach Evans with that. I think you said 8.5 per rush last season.
Yeah, it was like right at 8.
Yeah, he had 8.2 over 86 carries, 703 yards. And really, I mean, with Texas's quarterback situation right now, who knows what that's going to look like? Who knows what this passing game is going to look like, period. They are going to be relying on Bijan Robinson in Texas. And no matter who is the quarterback there, Zach, he's also a receiving threat. He had 15 receptions last season for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, the kid's a monster. He's one of the greatest he's one of the best running backs we've seen in Texas in a pretty long time now, because when you think about Texas, like in the past, 15 years, decade, you don't really think running backs. You know, you think more like quarterbacks, you think more defense, defensive back.
Well, I think Sam Ehlinger was like their leading rusher for like 4 years. So that tells you everything you need to know.
Like, we made such a big point over that or 2 seasons ago, I think. I think it was 2019 when we were talking. It was last year too. But yeah, dude, he is definitely the running back that Texas has been searching for. And I think that he is primed to have an even bigger season than last year, and he might be the leading rusher in this conference. And that's not talking down on Breece Hall. That's talking about how good Bijan Robinson truly is.
Well, I also feel like with Breece Hall, the competition this year is going to be so tough at running back. I mean, between Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, Zachary Evans, you got Kennedy Brooks, you got Eric Gray, both at Oklahoma. You have Deuce Vaughn at Kansas State that no one was talking about, who was one of the top freshmen last year coming out of there. Personally, I think the running back position is going to be loaded in the Big 12. It's going to be outrageous. But Brandon, got another defensive player for you. I have Nick Benito out of Oklahoma, edge rusher. This is a name, Brandon. It disappoints me because I feel like college football fans, they're overlooking such great talent because they don't watch anyone other than their favorite teams sometimes. I personally think this kid is arguably one of the best players in the country on defense. And the reason I say that, Brandon, he was the top graded pass rusher in the league in the country last year. He had graded at a 94, Brandon, for pass rush grade.
Right.
So it was almost perfect. And he also led the country in pass rush win rate, winning his pass rushes at almost a 30% clip. No one was even like close to that. And his pressure rate was up over 25%, which led the nation. Brandon, his worst game, this was his absolute worst rated game in terms of pass rushing. He still got pressured 20% of the time in that game that he rushed the passer. And that would be a good average for a player. And that was his worst game. So this kid's legit, man. 9 sacks, 12 tackles for loss in only 10 games, has over 12.5 sacks, 18 tackles for loss in his whole 2 seasons. His first step, Brandon, is what makes him so quick. Oklahoma really solely plays him outside the tackle. He's a true edge rusher. When you hear that edge position, it's Nick Benito. And he's so quick off the ball, Brandon, that a lot of these offensive tackles struggle to get their hands on him. And he just uses that speed, uses his length to keep their hands off of him. And when he does that, man, he's getting to the quarterback. He's one of like the biggest reasons this Alex Grinch defense has taken such a large leap. They were ranked, his defense 2 years ago, Brandon, was ranked 128th in the country in EPA for defense. They ranked top 20 last year in that. So it just shows how great Alex Grinch is. Nick Benito, outside of Kayvon Thibodeau, is the top edge rusher out there. I think that's a name that people need to write down and make sure to catch an Oklahoma game, because this kid he just has that it factor when you watch him, Brandon.
Yeah, I think you're right, Zach. I've only got one more that I want to talk about, really. So, I mean, if you have more, you can go ahead and go, or if you want me to go.
Oh, you're good, man. I only got one more, so go ahead.
Perfect. And, guys, as much as I want to talk about players like Spencer Rattler or Breece Hall, even like Eric Gray, I'm going to narrow it down to the one player that I think has the potential to be the best player in the Big 12 this season. He's the reigning defensive player in the NCAA, and that's Mike Rose. I already talked about him earlier, Zach. Last year, he's going to his senior season, and last year he's coming off of a massive year where he had a whopping 99 total tackles. That led the Big 12. I'm sorry, he was the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, not the NCAA. But
yeah,
I was like, dang, never mind. He had 57 solo tackles, also led the Big 12 there. Not only that, but as a linebacker, Zach, he had 5 interceptions, and that led the Big 12. This guy is an absolute monster. He's a guy that you do not want to be up against. He had 10.5 tackles for loss last season. I mean, there's all kind of stuff. Get this. This is even better because I already talked about the 5 interceptions, Zach. He had 2 passes defended last year. I mean, they're putting this guy in coverage. How diverse is your skill set as a linebacker that your defensive coordinator says, you know what, we're putting you in coverage right now. And we're letting you, not only that, but you're good enough to get 5 interceptions, 2 passes defended. I mean, over his 3-year career, Zach, he has 7 passes defended. He has 6 total interceptions. I mean, this guy is an absolute threat on the defensive side of the ball. And like I said, I know there's players like Spencer Rattler, there's players like Breece Hall, but Mike Rose might realistically be the best player in the Big 12 this season.
Yeah, I mean, he plays like that Luke Kuechly role on that defense. Yeah. Like, when you watch him play, he's their quarterback on defense. He's calling out the plays. He's very instinctive, and I think that's why you see his INT total so high, because he knows what's coming on a lot of these plays. He's calling out, reading the quarterback very well. So Mike Rose is a guy that I think you could see be a steal of the draft, Brandon, because I don't think he's going to test well in terms of measurables and numbers, but he's going to be like that 3rd, 4th, 5th round pick where you're like, man, where did he come from? And it's going to be Mike Rose from Iowa State. But let's end this segment, man, on another Oklahoma player. I know I try to spread it around. I try to spread the love, but I had to talk about this kid. If you watched our Oklahoma episode where I broke down why they should be top national championship contenders, Marvin Milnes is a name that you better recognize. Because, Brandon, I think this kid has like Jalen Waddle potential in terms of what he could be in college football. 5'11", like 180. Brandon, as a true freshman, had the 7th highest receiving grade in the country. He also had some of the most explosive plays in the country with over 15. As a true freshman, man, he was the top receiver. And I don't think you could really talk about his size or anything like that. Like, he's not going to go necessarily moss you, but it's not because he's bigger than you. It's because his ball skills, man, and his body control are outstanding. So we got copyrighted on the highlights I posted on our Oklahoma episode. So if you want to go check those out, go check out the Oklahoma episode. He makes some just ridiculous catches. And Brandon, you talk about micros in that Iowa State defense. There's a play on that video where he takes like one jab step and the entire defense just like crumbles, and he is just gone in the Big 12 championship game. This guy's going to be the #1 wide receiver for Oklahoma this year. And guys, if Spencer Rattler goes out and wins the Heisman, like a lot of people think, Marvin Milnes might get an invite just because his stats are so inflated. Because I love Jadon Hazelwood. I love Austin Stoner at the tight end position. When in doubt, Spencer Rattler is going to go to Marvin Milnes, and most of the time, guys, he's going to go make a play. He's that Devontae Smith type guy where you're like, I don't have anywhere to go. I need someone to make something happen. Marvin Milnes can make it happen. So, guys, remember that name. Marvin Milnes is the truth at wide receiver. But, Brandon, let's get to our last segment before we drop our official predictions, and that's sleeper teams in the Big 12. This probably, in my opinion, Brandon, how I looked at it, could be anyone outside of Oklahoma, Iowa State, because those are the two that are getting all the love. And I'm very, very passionate about this team. And I think we're both going to have them on our list. It's the TCU Horned Frogs, man.
It's my number one. It had to be.
I love this. I love what TCU's bringing this year, guys. I know that we have a lot of people. I think we have some people in the comments say Texas. TCU, in my opinion, I think they can make the Big 12 title, Brandon, if they just get past Iowa State. That's how good I think they could be. So when I look at this team, Brandon, they might be the best Gary Patterson team that we've seen in a while. You remember Gary Patterson has not had a double-digit win season since 2017. That was his last time with a very good TCU team. You've kind of talked about him, Brandon. Max Duggan is the key here, though. Last year was his best year as the quarterback for the Horned Frogs, but I still think he needs to take another step. I want to see a small increase in accuracy. He jumped to over 60% last year. I want to see it jump to like 65, 66, 67, somewhere in that range will be perfect for Duggan. He went from attempting under 6 yards a pass to over 7.5 yards per pass last year. 10 touchdowns to 4 interceptions is a huge improvement over the double-digit turnovers he had his freshman year. He's just getting better. And Brandon, his running ability, like we talked about, is what separates him. He's a playmaker. And, you can teach all these quarterback fundamentals. You can teach route, how to throw a certain ball, throw this, throw that. You can't teach instincts and playmaking. Outside the pocket, he just makes stuff happen. When you watch that TCU Texas game, I would love to do a film breakdown on that game, Brandon, one day. Well, I guess next offseason we'll have to do it. He honestly won them that Texas game last year. There were so many plays where Texas had that offense under wraps, and he just went out and made something happen, and I love it. And for me, Brandon, Doug Meacham, offensive coordinator, is going to scheme it up perfectly. Brandon, the RPO and read option game with Duggan and Zachary Evans could be the most dangerous duo in the country. And then on top of that, Joe Spielman is the real deal at wide receiver. One of the best wide receivers in the Big 12 last year. He's back. And Brandon, they rank number 2 in the Big 12 in wide receiving talent returning, right behind Oklahoma. I already mentioned Joe Spielman. You also got Quentin Johnson back. And when you combine the offense, Brandon, so the one critique of Gary Patterson offenses at his time is his offenses never live up to his defense. He always wins on defense because he's a defensive-minded coach. The defense is there. The offense is there. TJ Carter, though, Brandon, is a name I think people need to know. He's going to be Trevon Merrick's replacement at safety. He didn't have an outstanding year last year, but he showed promise down the stretch. But they have the best ranked corner in the Big 12, Brandon, in Trevarius Hodges-Tomlinson. He only allowed, Brandon, this is for the whole season now, only 12 catches on 45 targets, and had 14 pass breakups on those and forced tight coverage on almost 60% of his targets, Brandon, which led the nation. had a 90-plus coverage grade, which led the Big 12, and had the highest incompletion force rate in the country at over 35%. And on top of that, Kari Coleman and Akon Mathis are back at the edge rusher positions. Patterson, it has one of his most athletic defenses at his time at TCU. There's no reason, Brandon, when I'm looking at the schedule, to think TCU can't be undefeated going into the Oklahoma game on October 16th. And outside of Oklahoma, Iowa State might be favored in every matchup on the way to those two games.
Yeah, Zach, you're absolutely right. I mean, I love this team. I really do. Max Duggan's the truth. Zach Evans is the truth. This defense, all as an entire unit, is very good, very underrated too. But I fully agree with everything you just mentioned about TCU. I think that they are going to be one of these sleeper teams, and I wouldn't be shocked if they somehow slip their way into the Big 12 conference championship. If they win some games they're not supposed to. I wouldn't get too excited about that happening, but it might happen. I'm going to mention two more teams real quick, and I'm not going to go into hardly any detail on them, Zach, but I just needed to mention them. I feel like K-State always wins a few games that they should not win, and that might land them in the sleeper category just because the Big 12.
That's such an understatement. It's such an understatement. Like, K-State should have never, and I'm talking about absolutely never, beat Oklahoma. And I was at that game 2 years ago when it happened, Brandon. There's no reason why they should have won that game. I'm just going to be honest with you.
That's a fact. And my last team that I think might be a sleeper is I'm going to say Baylor. It's just because Dave Aranda at some point has to make this defense better, right? Like, he's one of the greatest defensive minds in college football, if not the greatest defensive mind in college football right now. And he's working with Baylor. Last season was his first season. Sure, he didn't have any offseason. I feel like I would not be shocked whatsoever if we just saw Baylor have a nasty defense this season, just out of nowhere. If we saw that happen, that wouldn't shock me whatsoever.
Yeah, and I want to break that down more, Brandon. And we got two comments here. Our guy Serve said TCU is going to be playing Oklahoma after the Texas game, so Oklahoma could be coming off a really tough game there. So that is a good point, Serve. And he said K-State's going to go for the three-peat against Oklahoma. Man, listen, Serve, I'm in Manhattan right now. I'm going to let you know, if that happens, this city might burn to the ground. Like, we're talking about like Philadelphia winning the Super Bowl burn to the ground if they pull off a third upset. I mean, they might give Chris Kleiman a lifetime contract if they beat Oklahoma 3 straight times as a top 5 team. I mean, they were a top 3 team the first time it happened. But Brandon, the reason that I'm worried about Baylor, that offense is atrocious.
It's bad.
It is terrible. And the problem is, I think their schedule lays out terrible, Brandon. They get Texas, TCU, Oklahoma, Kansas State 4 weeks back to back.
I mean, that's tragic. That is, you could not list that out any worse for Baylor.
Also, losing Charlie Brewer, I feel like really hurts them. I'm not a huge Jacob Zeno fan or a Jerry Bohannon fan, so I'm very worried on what their quarterback situation is going to be. Serve said they go crazy out there. Listen, man, Manhattan is a savage place. Let me just say that.
True. There's no
chance. The little apple, baby. But yeah, the offense for Dave Aranda. Listen, it is interesting though. They did fire Larry Fedora as offensive coordinator out there at Baylor, and they brought in Jeff Grimes. But it really depends on, man, Brandon, do you think Jeff Grimes can turn it around in 1 year with a brand new starting quarterback? Huge questions at running back, and then one of the worst wide receiving corps in the nation. It's tough for me, man. But I think I will be shocked if they're as bad as they were last year. 2 wins shocked me.
Yeah,
Baylor only winning 2 games was very, very shocking to me. So I don't think it's that bad. And for K-State, Brandon, it really just relies on one name, and because they got the running back in Deuce Vaughn, the wide receivers are solid. It's going to be, what is Skylar Thompson going to be after his injury? He was playing some of his best football before he went down. That's how they got the upset against Oklahoma. if he isn't 100%, Brandon, I don't know if they really have a true answer behind him. So for me, Kansas State relies solely on can Spencer Thompson be healthy or Skylar Thompson be healthy and return to full strength and just elevate his game slightly, Brandon, because his big time throw rate was second in the country.
Yeah.
Second in the country. But when you look at his true drop back rate and accurate pass rate, it's very, very low. And Brandon, he ranked 116th in average time to throw because that offensive line was just ravaged by youth and injuries. So offensive line's a huge question here. We got bowl sleeper pick right now, Oklahoma.
Facts.
Man.
Yeah. No one thinks they can win.
Texas Savage. But let's get to our official predictions here, man. Let me share this screen. I think we're all going to be shocked here that neither of us picked Oklahoma, but I'm just joking, guys. Listen, so let me break this down for y'all. I am on the left. Brandon's on the right. We both have Oklahoma, Iowa State going to the title game. Oklahoma winning the title game. For me, I have TCU at a strong third-place finish, Texas fourth, K-State fifth, Oklahoma State 6th, West Virginia 7th, Baylor 8th, Texas Tech 9th, Kansas 10th. B-Dub has Texas at 3, TCU at 4, Oklahoma State at 5, West Virginia 6, K-State at 7, Baylor 8, Texas Tech 9, and Kansas 10. Comment wherever you're watching, man. What are your thoughts on some of these picks? I'm about to call Brandon out right now. Where in the world does Texas finish third?
I believe in Bijan Robinson, and I believe in Steve Sarkisian, Zach. That's really all they need. I don't think this is an outrageous pick by any means. TCU, yes, is going to be very good, but I don't know. I feel like they need to put it all together and things have to land correctly. I don't know. Texas somehow benefits being in the Big 12. They always do. They always finish toward the top, if not at the top. So I don't know. I don't feel like I'm way out there putting Texas at 3.
Oh, man. Listen, I got them at 4. I had a real tough time. I'm not going to lie. So I'll tell you guys where I struggled. Brandon, I was so close. I think TCU and Iowa State are interchangeable right this second. And I really think K-State could finish above Texas.
What? Do
yeah,
you?
I do.
You have zero faith in Texas.
I don't love Hudson Card or Casey Thompson and what they've brought to the table in spring practice. Their secondary is going to be atrocious. When you don't have a second, they're not, and not even in the slightest. Look, their O-line and D-line are going to be the strength. They've done an outstanding job recruiting those two positions. The wide receiving core has a lot of questions. Bijan Robinson is great, Brandon, but he's not mortal. Like, you can't run him into the ground. Who's his backup?
Great question.
They have no depth at running back, in my opinion. And for me, if you don't have a quarterback, you don't have nothing in college football, Brandon. Let's just put it that way. Like, this isn't
necessarily true.
No, it is. In today's college football, you cannot win with a bad quarterback. But tell me the last team that competed for a natty with a bad quarterback.
With a bad quarterback? Alabama, Mac Jones.
That's tough. That's a bad look for you. That is a very bad look for you. Mac Jones played outstanding in the system he was in.
Yeah, with the best wide receivers in the country, yes.
But I'll give you that. That's 2013.
Yeah.
That's how long ago that was. 2013, Brandon.
That was 2020, bro.
Also, yeah, I guess you could put Jake Fromm to a point. I like that one, Jake Fromm. So that was 2017. But I mean, when you look at the playoffs in these recent years, Brandon, you have to have a playmaker at quarterback that can one, like Mac Jones, get the ball into the playmaker's hands. 2, you just have to have a game changer that can just go out there and win you the game. And I don't see Texas having that. And the reason that, I don't think the Mac Jones comments fits, Texas doesn't have the wide receivers that he had. Outside of Bijan Robinson, I don't know if there's a playmaker that you can trust to go get a play.
No, I mean that's a fact. I don't think the Big 12 is very good, Zach. I think they're extremely top heavy. By extremely top heavy, I mean the top 2 teams in this conference, I think, are like miles ahead of every other team. You mentioned that you think TCU and Iowa State are interchangeable. I disagree with that hard. I think that Iowa State is levels above every other team.
Levels.
Levels.
Well, let's okay. Hang on. Tank. We're going to exclude Alabama here, but let's exclude Alabama from the conversation because Blake Sims and Coker would not win a national title anywhere other than Alabama. Let's just put it like that. But Brandon, this shows you. I did some research while you were talking. The top pass catcher returning for Texas is Joshua Moore, right?
Yeah.
Where do you think he ranked last year in terms of receiving grade?
Wait, what do you mean receiving grade? You mean to rank him, or what do you want me to give him, like a grade?
Yeah, no. So he has a grade. Where do you think his receiving grade rated in college football last year in terms of wide receivers?
Top 60, top 70.
He was tied for 153.
That's tough. Why do you whisper to the mic like that, bro? You don't got to do that. We're not
tied for 153. Brandon, he was tied for 111th in explosive plays produced. His drop rate was 3%, and his yards per route run was 1.6.
That's tough.
That's the number one target you got out there in Texas right now.
But their number one target this next season is Bijan Robinson. So what are we talking about?
I'll give you that. Listen, I'm just not confident in Texas, man. I have them almost 4th by default because I have some questions about Kansas State, especially in the secondary and on the O-line. But, Brandon, I mean, so this is a question for you. So you have Texas 3rd. How worried are you the first 2 weeks of the season?
Not worried at all. I have zero stake in Texas. Why?
No, I mean, no, like zero. Like if you're like as a Tex, it's like put yourself in Texas's shoes. How worried are you about Louisiana Lafayette and Arkansas?
Oh my God, I'm extremely worried because maybe not that worried because Brandon has a little bit of skin in the game when it comes to Louisiana that first week of the season.
That's true.
He's known to jinx games, so maybe not that worried. But realistically, that's gonna be a tough game. That's the top 25. That's a ranked matchup, and UL's a good team. They're returning a lot, and Billy Napier's still there. He didn't leave, so this team is probably the same team we saw last season.
And bro, it's coming in 2 weeks. Texas is no closer to naming a QB starter. And before I know the comments are coming for people who don't watch Group of 5 football saying, "What are you talking about?" Louisiana Lafayette beat a top 10 team last year in Iowa State 31-14 week 1.
Yep. Sure
Smacked them. And Iowa State won the Big 12 in the regular season last year. So don't tell me, thank you, sir. Tell them UL is going to be a problem. Listen, if I'm a Texas fan, I am so much more worried about Louisiana Lafayette than I am Arkansas.
I'm worried about Arkansas if I'm a Texas fan.
I am too. I think, Brandon, the problem. Hang on, I gotta find Texas. Let me pull up Texas's schedule real quick.
I got it right here. You want it?
Yeah, read it out to us, man. What's Texas's schedule?
We've got Louisiana week 1, Arkansas week 2. They play Rice at home week 3.
Okay. So let's stop right there. So let's just rank losable games. Okay, losable games. So we have 2 so far, in my opinion, because Rice probably isn't losable. So you have 2 of your first 3 games is if you don't play well, you're going to get beat. So we got 2 losable games.
So let's just say, 2 losable games. Next game is Texas Tech. I don't think that's losable.
No, I won't put that there.
TCU is definitely losable. Oklahoma is like
a loss. I'm just going to call that a loss.
Oklahoma State, that's kind of, I think that's
a possible L.
It is. I don't think it's like they will lose, but they could. After that, we got Baylor. That's a win.
I got them over Baylor.
Yep. Iowa State, that's an L.
Possible L.
Kansas, that's a dub.
I don't know. Kansas is giving them some problems every single years.
West Virginia, but it's at West Virginia.
Possible L. I'm giving it a possible L.
And K-State in Austin.
Possible L.
Possible L. Okay, that's it.
That's 8 possible L's, Brandon. You're telling me so 8 games. Brandon, I honestly think if that quarterback position does not live up to the hype for Texas, that team could be. I think so. When I look at their ceiling, Brandon, I think their ceiling is 9-3.
Yep.
I think they Oklahoma, Iowa State, TCU for me are the 3 losses at the ceiling. The floor though is 6-6 for me.
Okay.
6-6 is as low as maybe 5-7 if they drop to UL. Because Brandon, what is okay? So let me ask you something. I mean, Iowa State rebounded, but they had a 3-year starter at quarterback in Brock Purdy. They had Breece Hall at running back, and they had the O line, Charlie Kohler at tight end. They had that defense. They had experience. What's Texas's mindset going to be with a youthful roster and a first-year head coach if UL goes out there and smacks them around?
Right, that's gonna be tough.
And then you don't get a rest. You don't get to lick your wounds because here comes Arkansas. And let's ask Auburn what happens when you sleep on Arkansas. Or how about this? Let's ask Georgia in the first half what happens when you forget that you're playing Arkansas.
Right. And it's not a bad Arkansas team. I mean, we're talking about like Sam Pittman, like new Arkansas. And
hey, listen, our SEC preview isn't here. KJ Jefferson's the truth, guys. He's not Felipe Franks. KJ Jefferson will beat you if you sleep on Arkansas this year. I am pumped for KJ Jefferson. I can't wait for SEC preview. But, guys, we appreciate y'all tuning in, man. Those were our Big 12 predictions, man, official predictions. We broke down games, players, storylines, all that stuff, man. We appreciate y'all tuning in for real on this Saturday night, man. We couldn't do this without y'all, so shout out to y'all for that. We got so much content coming, man. The season's coming tomorrow, and I don't think y'all are ready for the amount of content we're having. I mean, let's see. That's a tough out-of-conference for Texas, guys. Please give me your thoughts on Oklahoma and Nebraska before you end the show. Oh, if Oklahoma wins that dominant fashion, will it be enough to say Big 12 over Big 10?
No,
okay, so let's take this one at a time. Hang on. Oklahoma is probably so I'm not like a line setter, but I would imagine I'm not thinking of like betting wise. I'm just thinking about college football analyst wise. Oklahoma should be no less than a 24 to 25 point favorite in that game.
And I might be a line maker, but 21.5 is what I put on that right now.
So I think if Oklahoma loses to Nebraska, Lincoln Riley has to leave town. Like, you can't lose to Nebraska with the roster you have, especially with Scott Frost might be suspended for that game, depending on how the investigation goes. They lost their best player on the field in Wan'Dale Robinson. Adrian Martinez might be one of the worst quarterbacks in the Power 5, and they have holes at almost every position you could think of.
Right.
So I think you're looking at Oklahoma will have might have a more competitive game with like a Kansas State or something than a Nebraska, and I think there's a lot of teams in the Big Ten that will beat Nebraska this year. And if they do it in dominating fashion, I still don't think you could say Big 12 over Big 10 serve, just because Nebraska's probably not even a top 3 or 4 team in their own division. So I think Oklahoma would have to go to the playoff serve and smack around Ohio State for that to really become the conversation, in my opinion. So the only way you can say Big 12 over Big 10 serve is if all those non-conference games we talked about, the Big 12 wins, and then Washington and Oregon beat Michigan, Ohio State, and Minnesota loses their big non-conference game. And also Big 12 over Big 10's more relevant serve is if Iowa State smacks Iowa. If they go into Iowa and just beat them to death, then all those things coming together, you'll have that final argument, Big 12 over Big 10. But I don't think the sole Oklahoma over Nebraska win is going to give you enough ammo to say Big 12 over Big 10, because this is the same issue, Serve, I have with the SWAC. You can't like taking your best team and beating a horrible team in another conference isn't enough to change anything. I want to see best versus best matchups when we start comparing conferences. That's why I think these non-conference games are so important to schedule, because you can't even debate the conferences until you do that. So Tank just looked up the line. He said it's 18.5 right now for Oklahoma.
Yeah, I'll take
that.
I'm pretty good.
Smash that.
I was going to say, where is that at, Tank? Because I got to do some research because I would love that line.
And Tank, SEC will be next week. So we'll announce that as it gets closer. I believe so. With college football being next Saturday, I think we're going to try to move it up to Friday. But we'll announce the date.
On that, though. We might have to go earlier on that.
Yeah, we might even go earlier on that. So I'll let you know. It might even be on Thursday. We'll announce our next step. We'll probably announce on our Monday episode when it'll be. Let's see. He said if Oklahoma beats Nebraska, can we say SEC over everyone else in the world? Oh, he said FanDuel was where that line was.
Yeah, that's a
shout out to FanDuel. But guys, next week we'll announce the dates on Monday's episode. We're doing our Pac-12 and SEC previews to end our previews. Then later in the week, man, we're doing game breakdowns for every game this weekend, man. Like I told y'all, man, I don't care if it's a bunch of Brandons going out there to play a bunch of Zachs. We're breaking it down. We'll know who wins that game anyway. But man, we are here for all y'all's college football content, man. Hey, only channel on YouTube or anywhere, any podcast that we cover every level of college football. So make sure to subscribe now over on YouTube. Like and share the video if you're on Facebook, and retweet, like on Twitter if you're watching over there, man. We appreciate all y'all's support, man. We got so many episodes coming. I think we'll be dropping like 2-3 episodes a day starting the season, man. So make sure to get all your Blue Bloods content in, man. The season's finally here. Y'all rock with us all off season. We can't start to drop those game previews and recaps and everything. But guys, we will see y'all Monday right here on the Blue Bloods. But for now, we are out.